Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something that is honestly equal parts fascinating and totally terrifying: the literal villain's playbook. We are going to decode the dark psychology and manipulation tactics that have been used for centuries to control, confuse, and conquer the human mind. If you have ever felt like your reality was being bent by a coworker, a partner, or maybe even a politician, don't worry. You aren't going crazy. You're just on the receiving end of a highly engineered, deeply unhinged strategy. So to kick things off, I want you to ask yourself a quick question. What do Genghis Khan, ancient Persian warlords, and your toxic ex-partner all have in common? I know, it sounds like the setup to a really bad joke, but the answer is actually deeply intriguing. They all rely on the exact same psychological warfare tactics. Because whether you're trying to conquer an empire on horseback or just win a petty argument about loading the dishwasher, the underlying strategies of shock, awe, and reality distortion remain remarkably identical. Okay, let's dive into Chapter 1, The History of Mind Games. See, psychological manipulation isn't just some new internet trend. It is literally as old as war itself. Take a look at 525 BC, at the Battle of Pelusium. The Persians actually held cats as hostages. Yeah, they carried them on their shields to paralyze the Egyptian army because they knew the Egyptians worshipped felines. I mean, imagine losing a literal war to a kitten. Fast forward to the 13th century, and Genghis Khan is out there catapulting severed heads over village walls just to induce sheer terror before a single sword was even swung. And during World War II, Tokyo Rose weaponized radio broadcasts with false victories to crush the morale of Allied forces. These are literal, historical mind games, completely designed to make the enemy defeat themselves.
So, these historical examples really illustrate one core concept. The ultimate target has always been the human mind. The brain is the battlefield. Even the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency notes that psychological warfare aims to mislead, intimidate, and demoralize. But here is the absolutely crucial pivot for us today. These tactics, they've migrated off the literal battlefield. The brand new psychological war zone is the modern workplace, the boardrooms, and even our own living rooms, totally exploiting our everyday cognitive vulnerabilities.
Moving right along to Chapter 2, Meet the Dark Triad.
If history gave us the playbook, will these three traits make up the ultimate modern-day practitioner? First up, we've got narcissism, which is driven by grandiosity, intense pride, and an empathy level of, well, absolute zero. Right in the middle, there's Machiavellianism. Think of your most ruthlessly calculated ladder-climbing boss, completely indifferent to morality and driven purely by calculated self-interest. And finally, psychopathy. This is characterized by continuous antisocial behavior, impulsivity, and a really chilling remorselessness. Now, while these are distinct, empirical evidence actually shows they very often overlap to form a sort of supervillain interpersonal style.
So, what exactly do they want? Regardless of which of those dark triad traits is most dominant, the ultimate goal is always exactly the same: evade responsibility, maintain power, and extract what clinical models call narcissistic supply. This supply is the attention, the admiration, or the emotional responsiveness they just desperately need from others to maintain their own incredibly fragile sense of self. These manipulators are quite literally emotional vampires. They don't want your blood, they want your energy, your time, and your sanity. And they have a highly specific, repeatable method for feeding. Which brings us to Chapter 3, the narcissistic abuse cycle. You know, toxic relationships with these kinds of individuals aren't just random outbursts of bad behavior. They are highly engineered neurobiological traps, and they follow 4 very predictable sequential steps: love bombing, devaluation, discard, and hoovering. This pattern actually physically trains a victim's nervous system to become completely addicted to the chaos, and they do it on remarkably predictable timelines across totally different relationships. Let's break down exactly how this works.
Okay, so it all starts with love bombing. And let's be clear, this isn't just someone being nice to you. It's this intense, accelerated closeness that's designed to literally flood your body with dopamine and oxytocin. The manipulator uses excessive mirroring, making you feel like they are your absolute perfect match, along with future faking, where they're promising you this idealized life together right out of the gate. It feels incredibly real and euphoric, kind of like you're in a rom-com montage. But the reality is, it's entirely unsustainable. You're being placed on a pedestal so incredibly high that you have nowhere to go but down. They aren't building a foundation, they are setting you up for the fall.
And let me tell you, that fall is absolutely devastating. First comes devaluation, which is a slow, agonizing drain. All that initial warmth just vanishes, and it's replaced by constant criticism and emotional distance. This creates this chronic, low-grade stress as you desperately work harder and harder to recover that initial love-bombing high. But then comes the discard, And this is not your standard tearful breakup. This is an abrupt, incredibly cruel withdrawal that triggers acute grief and literal psychological withdrawal symptoms, very much like coming off a substance.
Then, just when you think you are finally blissfully free, step 4 hits. Hoovering. And yes, it is literally named after the vacuum cleaner, because this is a recontact attempt where the manipulator tries to simply suck you back in. They offer just enough warmth or maybe some beautifully faked accountability designed specifically to reactivate your original attachment to them. And if it works, the trap resets, the amnesia sets in, and the whole cycle begins all over again.
Next up, Chapter 4, Darvo and Dirty Tricks. So how on earth do they get away with this when they're confronted? Well, if you've ever tried to hold a manipulator accountable, you've probably heard a variation of this exact, deeply frustrating quote. Actually, I am the one who's been hurt here. Or maybe they throw out, "You're so sensitive, stop being dramatic." It's incredibly infuriating, right? You walk into a conversation fully intending to address how they hurt you, and somehow, miraculously, you walk out apologizing to them. This mind-bending shift isn't an accident. It's actually a well-documented psychological tactic called Darvo. Let's break it down. Step 1, deny the facts. I never said that. You're hearing things. Step 2, attack the accuser. You're only bringing this up because you're insecure and crazy. And then step 3, reverse the victim and offender roles. Suddenly, they flip the script entirely. You walked in to talk about how they lied to you, and suddenly you are the one apologizing for not trusting them enough. It is a highly calculated narrative shift that centralizes sympathy entirely back on them, all while making you look like the bad guy. And we have to talk about the toll this takes, because being repeatedly Darvoed isn't just some annoying communication quirk. It leaves deep, measurable psychological scars. Victims experience chronic anxiety, constantly walking on eggshells, just waiting for the next shoe to drop. Research actually shows a direct link between Darvo and increased self-blame. But perhaps most insidiously, it causes derealization. This is a state where you literally lose your grip on reality, you internalize their false narrative, and you genuinely start to doubt your own memories. It is psychological warfare working exactly as intended. Let's turn things around in Chapter 5, Defense Against the Dark Arts. Okay, now that we can see the playbook clearly, how do we actually shield ourselves? Building your defense shield requires a few really actionable steps. First off, document your experiences. When that gaslighting starts, having dates, phrases, and facts written down immediately after they happen is your anchor to sanity. Second, set firm boundaries and enforce them without apologizing. Third, boost your emotional intelligence. See, the moment you can label them doing Darvo in real time, it completely neutralizes their power over you. It becomes a predictable trick rather than a personal attack. And finally, seek a safe mediator or professional support. Seriously, do not try to untangle a manipulator's web entirely on your own. And when you absolutely do have to engage with them, you need a phrase that shuts down the manipulation without feeding their need for drama. Honestly, memorize this one right here. I understand you disagree, but this is what happened to me. This is incredibly powerful. It doesn't ask for their permission, it doesn't invite debate, and it completely halts the Darvo cycle in its tracks by simply refusing to adopt their altered reality. This really brings us full circle. As former Senator Norm Coleman once noted, psychological warfare essentially endeavors to break the spirit and the resolve of those it attacks by creating a lose-lose situation. It's heavy, right? Because whether it's happening on a geopolitical battlefield or just sitting across from you at a coffee shop, the goal of the manipulator is to break your spirit so you will surrender control. Validating that you have been in a literal psychological war is the very first step to reclaiming your peace. So we've explored the timeline of mind games, we've decoded the dark triad, tracked the abuse cycle, and armed you with defenses against Darvo. This kind of manipulation really only works in the shadows. But guess what? Now the lights are on. So I'll leave you with this one final provocative question to think about. Now that you know the villain's playbook, who in your life is currently running it? Stay vigilant, trust your reality, and thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.